I'm about halfway through writing the Trust Premium book. The book focuses on how important trust is for the sales process. It emphasizes two premises. One, that people buy from people they trust, and I refer to this as the trust preference. And two, that they're willing to pay a premium, which is what I call trust premium. And again, it's to someone they trust. But it doesn't end there. Trusting the salesperson or professional giving a service creates loyal customers who buy from you repeatedly and stay with your services for a long time. But what if your business is a one-time transactional business where you don't expect repeat business from the same customer? Well, the trust that your customer has in you will transfer to your next customer. In this episode, I'll explain this entire cycle right after this. Welcome to The Trust Show. I'm Yoram Solomon, your host, the author of the Book of Trust, and facilitator of the Trust Habits Workshop. My mission is simple. I want to help you form habits that build your trustworthiness, because the answer to this question will have the biggest impact on your personal and professional success or failure. Can I trust you? I'm going to break the process into three parts. The first part is what happens before the purchase decision is made. The second part is what happens when the purchase decision is made. And the third part is what happens after the purchase decision was made. So I'll start with the first one. What happens before the purchase decision is made? You know, a lot of people will train you on how to make cold calls, how to convince people to buy from you. But here's the reality. The reality is the amount of spam and scams, more specifically, are growing like crazy. In 2022, 56.5% of all emails were spam. 56.5%. Spam emails had cost businesses close to $20.5 billion a year. Over $20 billion a year. 73% of spam emails were attempting to do identity theft. This is theft. This is criminal. This is not to try and sell you something you don't need. This is actually to try and steal money from you. 73% of spam emails, that's what they're trying to do. Different ways. 36% of spam emails were marketing and advertising. So again, we're trying to sell you something, whether you need it or not. We're going over quantity instead of quality. By the way, the top spam email generator is the United States, with 8.61 billion spam emails sent every day. In October of 2023, Gallup did a survey and they asked Americans about experiences with crime, personally, and in their household. The top crime that was reported was identity theft. 11% of people who were surveyed experienced it personally. 16% experienced it in their household. Somebody in their household had that. 16%. Now, I'm talking about identity theft that actually happened, not that they were exposed to an attempt. I'm talking about it actually happened. 11% said it happened to me. 16% said it happened in my household. 8% said that they were tricked by a scammer into sending money or giving them access to a financial account. 15% said somebody in our household. It happened to somebody in our household. Those are huge numbers. And they're significantly higher than crimes like break-ins, cars being stolen, sexual assault, armed robberies. And in that same report, they actually asked participants what are the crimes that they're most worried about. And number one, with 72%, was being a victim of identity theft. which is not surprising if the percentages of the attempts are so high, the percentages of successful identity theft were so high. The second, so if 72% were afraid of identity theft as number one, the second was only 57% being tricked by a scammer into sending money or providing access to their financial accounts, which, by the way, is huge. And, so 72% are worried about being the victim of identity theft. 57% are worried about being tricked by a scammer to send money or give access. And only 37% are worried about being mugged. 28% worried about being murdered. 27% worried about being sexually assaulted. So much less than being victim of identity theft or being tricked by a scammer. That's what we're afraid of. Why is that important? Because that's exactly why cold calls don't work. We are afraid of identity theft. We're afraid of being scammed. I'm not even talking about being afraid of wasting time on somebody calling you with something that you don't need or don't want. That's why trust premium is so important. I'll touch on the research that I've done under a trust premium. So first of all, I wanted to know, and there are two terms, actually three terms that I'm using. One is trust preference. Trust preference is with everything else being equal, the probability that I'm going to choose or the customer is going to choose a trustworthy salesperson or professional over somebody they don't know. Now, it's important that I made this distinction. It's over somebody they don't know. It's not over somebody they distrust. Distrust is an active act of distrusting someone. Trusting is the active act of trusting someone. Unknown is I don't know. It's right there in the middle. So when I compare the trust preference, I don't compare trust preference for someone that's trusted versus someone that's distrusted, that's actively distrusted. I compare somebody you trust or the customer trust over somebody they don't know. The first time that I did a study like that, it was really very rudimentary, was for a remodeling project, about a $10,000 remodeling project. The trust preference was 98.2%. People were 98.2% more willing to choose the trustworthy contractor in that case over someone they don't know. And the trust premium was 29.6%, which means that they were willing to pay almost 30% higher price when they hire somebody that they trust versus somebody they don't know. I was a little more organized when I did last year in 2023 when I started. I'm still conducting this research with financial advisors. With financial advisors, I found that the trust preference was 96.6%. Customers are 96.6% more likely to choose a financial advisor they trust over one they don't know. But here's where it gets very interesting. They're willing to pay 39.4% higher fees to a financial advisor they trust over one they don't know. It's almost 40% higher fees. I did something similar with insurance agents, and I found the trust preference was 93.5%. The trust premium was only 5.5%, which I explain as this is because the premium is really provided, or the insurance is really provided by another company. And so it's really the same product, exactly the same product. And the agent, by the way, you don't determine what is the fee that the agent gets because the agent gets a commission from the insurance company. My next, just so that you know, my next shot is going to be at lawyers and accountants, specifically for small businesses. Okay, so first of all, we know that trust plays a major role in the purchase decision, and I'll get back to that. But before the purchase decision is made, what does the customer do? the customer, well, if it's a cold call, then the customer doesn't do anything, but typically it's not a cold call. Typically, the customer will do some research before inviting someone. And then there is transferable trust. Transferable trust is I trust someone not because I know them, so the salesperson or the professional, not because I know them, but because somebody else told me I can trust them. That somebody else can be online reviews, like the ones you have on Amazon or Google or other places, Yelp, online reviews. Here, the quantity matters, but those are people you don't know. It's the fact that they work for a trusted company, if this is applicable. It's the fact that somebody they know, somebody the customer knows and trusts, recommends that salesperson or professional. And that the salesperson or professional gave a reference. Here is a previous customer of mine. Call them, and that reference checks out. The numbers vary. They're relatively consistent between financial advisors and insurance agents, for example, and in general, it's pretty consistent. But I can say one thing about all of those, all four of them: online reviews, trusted company, recommendation by someone you trust and know, and reference checks by someone that the salesperson gave you. All of them ended up between, on the scale of 1 to 4, between I'm more likely to hire them and I'm much more likely to hire them. All of them fell between these two. So it's definitely a positive effect. The question is how positive. And on average, by the way, it was 3.56, which is right between 3 and 4. Actually, it's closer to I'm much more likely to hire them than I'm just more likely to hire them. That's how transferable trust plays. So before the purchase decision, before the interaction that ends with the purchase decision, we start with transferable trust because cold calls don't work anymore. I would not buy from somebody that just called me, reached out to me, and I don't know anything about them, and nobody transferred trust of them to me. So that's what happens before the purchase decision. What happens during that interaction, during the interaction of the financial, the purchase decision, the interaction that would end with the purchase or without a purchase? So we talked about what took you to have the meeting with the salesperson, whether it's a phone call, whether it's an in-person meeting. We talked about that. And now, how do we make the purchase decision? So we make the purchase decision based on a very simple formula. The value that I believe, that I expect I will get, I call it the perceived value, is higher than the price that I expect or believe I'm going to pay. I call that the perceived price. As long as the perceived value is higher than the perceived price, the value I expect to get is higher than the price I expect to pay, I will purchase. It's very simple. Now, the value is made of a lot of things. It could be features, performance, products are different, services are different, and so on. But trust is a value. I just made the case, and that's the trust preference. How important is it to you that that you're going to be chosen? But we're not talking about the price, the value to you, the salesperson, the professional. I'm talking about the value to the customer. The fact that the customer is actually willing to pay a higher price means that to someone they trust, means that trustworthiness of the salesperson or the professional has value. And in some cases, you saw it's almost 40%. By the way, the flip side is if you don't have that value, if you're not trusted, if you're distrusted, there's actually a distrust discount. So you're actually losing money because the customer perceives getting less value. Now, whether it's the research that you have conducted, the research that the customer has conducted, or it's the transferable trust that I talked about, it establishes the opening, the beginning of the process of that transaction. It establishes essentially the three components of the competence, personality compatibility, or symmetry, which I lump together as the who you are. So the research that they've done, the transferable trust, got them to the who you are, to determine who you are and whether you're somebody that can be trusted. But that's only the beginning. That sets the trust level to the beginning of that interaction. There is still an interaction here. At the end of the interaction, the level of trust that they have in you is determined by the other three components. The positivity, your positivity during the interaction, how empathetic you are, and how no BS you are. And it's accelerated by time and intimacy, the other two components of the what you do during the interaction. At the end of that interaction, those what you do components, positivity, time, and intimacy, establish the ending trust at the end of the interaction. And that is the point where you make the decision, the purchase decision, or decide not to purchase. So, the first part, research and transferable trust, brought the customer to an initial level of trust in you. Your behavior during the interaction brought them to the ending level of trust in you. And now they make the purchase decision where trust plays part of value, and they buy because the value is higher than the price. And they don't buy because the value is not higher than the price. The step 3, after the purchase, there is still something that happens after the purchase. The level of trust in you is determined by the relationship between the perceived value, the perceived value and the actual value, and the relationship between the perceived price and the actual price. Let's start with the price. The price is easier. You thought you're going to pay something, then you find out that you're going to be paying more. Maybe it's a service they didn't tell you. Maybe they gave you the first year at a lower price, and then you find out that you're paying a higher price. When the actual price is higher than the perceived price, the price you thought you were going to pay, you don't trust them. You lose trust in them. Now, you may say, I don't care, I already have them, but we'll put that aside for a second. Higher actual price than perceived price causes a loss of trust in you, in the salesperson, in the professional. How about the value? The value is the opposite. Higher actual value causes them to trust you. Higher actual value compared to the perceived value, the value that they thought they were buying, causes them to trust you more. Let's go back to price. If the actual price is lower than the perceived price, they will trust you more. They ended up paying a little less. Maybe all of a sudden when they were ready to buy something, and when they got to pay for it, you came up with, oh, by the way, we have a coupon now that you didn't know about of 20% off, and you're going to be getting 20% off. The actual price was lower than the perceived price. You were ready to make the deal. Remember, the purchase decision was made based on the perceived price. You were ready to make that deal, and now you find that the price is actually better. Now, be careful. Remember that we have those statements buried in our head. You get what you paid for. So if the actual price is actually lower, and remember, I'm not talking about before the purchase or during the purchase decision. I'm talking about after the purchase decision was already made. You already purchased, and you find that the price is actually lower. So yes, we have it in our head. You get what you paid for, and you may be a little weary about, so did I actually get something less than I thought because I paid less? But you will find out. You will find out in the actual value. So I'm not worried about you get what you paid for in this case. If the actual value is lower than the perceived value, lower than the value that you thought you were going to buy, you don't trust them. Okay, so there is an opposite relationship between perceived and actual, between price and value. If the actual price is higher than the perceived price, low trust. Actual price lower than the perceived price, high trust. Actual value higher than the perceived value, high trust. Actual value lower than the perceived value, low trust. I got less than I thought I would get. Now I want to break it into two types of relationships. One is an ongoing relationship. An ongoing relationship could be a customer that keeps on buying more and more from me, keeps coming back. It can even be a professional that, I hired somebody to remodel my pool. He did such a great job, and I'm not being cynical. He really did such a great job that I would come back. I had another project. The first thing I did was I called him and I asked him, do you do these projects too? Even though it's not pool remodeling, it's something else, but I want to go back to him if it's something that he does. So one reason why you want to make sure that there is a high level of trust post-purchase decision is because that's how you get loyal customers. That's how you get repeat business. But what if it's a single transaction? What if there's absolutely no reason that this customer is going to come back to me to buy again from me? Because what I have to sell them is one and done. They're not coming back, or the probability of them coming back is very little. Does that mean that I don't need to worry about trust post-purchase? Does that mean that it's okay if the actual price is higher than the perceived price? It's okay that the actual value is lower than the perceived value? No, it's not. Do you remember how this cycle started? This cycle started by transferable trust. Remember that the customer, because of the level of spam and scam and identity theft and crimes that are associated with what otherwise would be cold calls, because of that, customers would not reach out to you or would not accept your call unless there is some transferable trust. And transferable trust comes through, let's put aside for a second the company, the brand of the company that you work for. And I'm going to look at the other three. Make a recommendation to somebody who knows you and trusts you. It's your willingness to make that recommendation because you trust the salesperson. It's your willingness to write a positive review. And it's your willingness to be a reference for them if they refer a new customer, a potential, a prospective customer to you. Those depend on whether you trust them. Now, I did that only for financial advisors. I should say I analyzed it only for financial advisors, but look at the numbers. Customers were very likely. So I gave 4 options here. And I said, here's the question. I asked, if you decide to hire financial advisor A, and they kept every promise they made to you, how likely are you to recommend them to people who trust me, post a positive review online, be willing to be a reference for them? I gave 4 options. Not likely at all, somewhat likely, likely, and very likely. If they trusted me, if I kept all of my promises, and in other words, actual value not less than perceived value, actual price not more than perceived price, they are 63% of them said that they are very likely to recommend me. 46% very likely to write a positive review. 58% very likely to be willing to be a reference. If I want to see how many of them said I'm likely or very likely, 84% of them were likely or very likely to be willing to give a recommendation to someone who trusts them. 77% were likely or very likely to write an online review, and 87% were likely or very likely to be a reference for you. Now, if I wanted to lump the somewhat likely, likely, and very likely, we're at 98%, 94%, and 98%, almost 100%. Simply because you kept your promises, because your actual price was not higher than the perceived price, because your actual value was not lower than the perceived value. You kept your promises. And this is how they start the next cycle with your next customer, even if they will never be your customer. The fact that business today relies so heavily on transferable trust as we go into the cycle, it's important that your current customers be willing to provide that transferable trust. Now, I don't know about you, but I think this is a very cool cycle. So let me just summarize what the cycle is like. The cycle starts with transferable trust. With everything that's happening today, we are so not trusting of people who reach out to us without transferable trust, that transferable trust is a must to enter. Then there is the purchase decision. Transferable trust gets us to the entry level, to the initial level of trust when we have the purchase interaction. What you do, the three components of what you do, take us to the ending level of trust right when I need to make the purchase decision. I make the purchase decision based on value versus price, value higher than price, where trust, as you already know through Trust Premium, is value, significant value. Then we have after purchase trust, which in case of a professional like a consultant or a coach or other ongoing relationships, this is how you keep your customer, how your customer is a repeat customer when they buy more things or the same things from you over and over again. But even if you have a one-time transaction type of business, the trust that they have in you post-purchase is the transferable trust that opens the door to the next customer. Now, this overall concept works in all industries, period. You already know by my 8 laws of trust that trust is relative, trust is personal, trust is contextual. The specific numbers are different in different industries and definitely with different people. But the overall concept works in all industries. That's it for today. I hope that this made you think a little differently about trust. May trust be with you. This was The Trust Show. What would you like to know about trust and trustworthiness? Let me know and I'll answer it in a future episode. I would love to hear from you. Email me at yoram@thetrustshow.com. If you like this episode, subscribe to the show so you will automatically get notified when I release a new episode. Rate it. Write a review for this podcast because those ratings help not only you, but also others looking for podcasts just like this. If you're looking for more resources to learn about how to build trust, be trusted, or know who to trust, look up my workshops, online courses, books, or go to my website, trusthabits.com. And remember that the answer to these two questions will have the biggest impact on your personal and professional success or failure. Can I trust you, and can you trust me? Thank you for listening or watching The Trust Show.